All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka. With me today, we have Ron Higgs from Wolf Management Solutions, and we are going to be talking about reducing business growth challenges. Ron, awesome to have you here today.
David, it is great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun here. So, Ron, as we always do with our guests, I think the first thing we're gonna start out doing is tell us a little bit about your background, Ron, and kind of catch us up to what you're doing today.
Well, I have a long sordid story, as you know, right? So I
Yeah,
started in the
it's awesome
Navy.
to tell it. That's why I want to tell it. It's good.
Yeah. Well, I started my career in the Navy. I went to the Naval Academy, went to flight school after that, flew airplanes in the Navy, went into what we call program management and acquisition, where I worked with defense contractors on future Navy programs related to naval aviation. And I also worked on a satellite system. After I was all done in the Navy, couldn't really decide what I wanted to do. So I did a few things, including some consulting, mostly in the aerospace and defense industry. I worked in sales and business development for a large defense contractor. I worked I worked in flight operations for an even larger defense contractor that builds airplanes in the Pacific Northwest. Uh, Flew airplanes for those guys, and then took on some management responsibilities and decided I wanted to leave to experience some different things. So I ended up working in about four startups, all of which failed. I'm hoping I'm not the common denominator in all that. And I went through a few iterations of my consulting business, but just by
Hmm.
pure luck and networking, I ended up as the COO of a small company. And I was like, hey, this is my home. I found something that I really had a skills for. I really enjoyed it, but I got that job. I started that job in January of 2020, and in April of 2020, I got laid off. So, and a lot
Yeah.
of us ran into some hard times because of the pandemic. So I rebranded my consulting business as a fractional COO business, and I've been doing that since. So looking for busy business owners that need help running their companies, and I come in and try to pull them out of the everyday running of the business, get them set up so they're working more in their zone of genius, and try to do that for a couple of companies at a time.
Very good. Very good. Well, I think you went over it pretty quickly, your background, Ron, because first of all, you're the only man that I know that has landed a plane on fire or had to ditch a plane that was on fire. You can tell us. Let's hear the story about that one because that one's always really interesting.
Well, there was no ditching, so I have
There you go.
an equal number of takeoffs and landings.
Okay,
But
that's good. Equal number of takeoffs and landings. That's
I
important when you're
have an
flying
equal
planes.
number of
There you
takeoff
go.
and landings, but some scary moments. And I think anyone who's been involved in naval aviation will tell you that naval aviation is probably responsible for some of the most exciting moments of their lives, right? Truly, right? It is also responsible for some of the most terrifying moments of their lives
Yes.
at the same time. So, and it could be in the same day or even on the same flight, because I've gone from wow, I can't believe I get paid to do this to expletive. I can't, they don't pay me enough to do this in the same flight
Exactly.
or the same day. So I
Yeah.
did have an experience where one airplane caught on fire, and we had to put it on the ground immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's good stuff. Now you're also the only person I know that has ever applied for the space program. Is that true?
It is. And so my dream as a kid was to become an astronaut. And so I literally figured out the path. And I went to the local library to do it. Right. So I went to the local library, figured out what I needed to do to become an astronaut. I Naval Academy, amongst other places, but it's like Naval Academy,
Mm-hmm.
um, become a test pilot, apply for the astronaut program. If you look at the histories of some of the astronauts,
Yep.
that's sort of the path. And so I committed to taking that path. And I actually went to the Naval Academy, graduated, went to flight school, got myself in the United States Naval Test Pilot School. I ended up becoming a flight instructor at the Test Pilot School. And from that, I was able to apply to be a mission specialist astronaut candidate at NASA. So the Navy forwarded my name to NASA as a mission specialist astronaut candidate. And then when my package got to NASA and I was reviewed by NASA, I ended up getting disqualified for a medical reason. So, in terms of dreams, as a kid who was wanted to be an astronaut because he spent a lot of time watching Star Trek, to I got as close to that goal as I
Yeah.
possibly could. So
Yeah.
I'm proud of it.
Yeah. That's cool. So, as a test pilot, what are some of the planes you can talk about that you're able to fly? That was interesting.
I'm lucky. And so if you remember Top Gun, Maverick and Goose. So, I was a
Yeah.
naval flight officer. So I was Goose. I got to do a lot of the work while the pilots took a lot of the credit, right?
Okay.
So I got to fly over somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 different aircraft. So mostly when I
Wow.
was in test pilot school and a flight instructor there, mostly F/A-18s. I flew S-3 Vikings in the fleet, which is a carrier-based submarine hunter, which they retired quite a few years ago. So those don't fly anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
I got to fly a B-25 bomber, which
Oh,
is
wow.
on an evaluation exercise, which I thought was just tremendous. And I also got to fly a DC-3. Some of the
Wow.
most fun I've ever had was flying at the Havilland Beaver, which is a tail dragger. Which
Yeah.
there's a lot of them up in Alaska, and as you know, Kenmore Air
Yeah.
flies some of those things. And
Yeah.
that was literally the most fun I had, just flying those airplanes because they were just so simple.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's something.
Also got
Well,
to
and
fly a glider. So from flying
oh,
in complete silence, or from flying with lots of noise, and basically losing my hearing as as I got older because of being around all that jet noise, to be able to
mm-hmm.
fly in a glider was pretty interesting because flying in silence was something that I had never done.
I bet that is quite an experience.
It is nothing but the wind rushing by. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And it always is interesting to me as to how long you can stay in the air with them if you know how to get to the right place and ride the airfoils and the
Yeah.
draft and everything. It's
Yes,
something.
indeed. And I don't think the glider's ever caught on fire.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably not happened. That's a good point. It's a little
One more
safer in that
story I
respect.
want to tell you about this. When I was in a company, we had some personnel issues, and I just remember sitting across from somebody going, "Oh my goodness, this is really stressful." And they were talking about how stressful it was. And I just looked at them and go, "Well, I flew airplanes off aircraft carriers and landed one airplane that was on fire. So my idea of a stressful situation might be a little different than yours."
Yes.
So
Yes.
I was having a little trouble with my empathy there, but I've adjusted accordingly now.
Yes. Well, I think that's why I wanted to share it too. Not only the stories are interesting, it's pretty incredible some of the stuff, especially you growing up as a kid wanting to be an astronaut and just going all the way until medically you couldn't go anymore, and that's super cool. But the fact is that the the military and especially flying planes and doing those kind of things really takes a systematic approach to being able to do things. I mean, you don't start a plane up without checking everything over. You don't take the plane off the ground without checking even more things. You check things in the air, you check things when you land. There's systems and things that you need to do throughout. I'm assuming I don't fly, but that's correct, right?
Absolutely. And the movie Top Gun and the upcoming sequel would have you believe that we just jump into a jet, we go off flying, we come back, we high five each other, we play a game of volleyball, and then head to the bar. No other, I don't think any movies anywhere captures the amount of work and effort it really takes to stay current in aviation, and what we have to know, what we have to learn, what we continually get tested on, because it's a perishable skill. I mean, I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you an example. We're up there flying around, and if you detect a ship out there, well, what kind of ship is it? Is it a U.S. ship? Is it an enemy ship? Okay, hey, it's an enemy ship. Okay, what kind of weapons does that enemy ship have? Okay, hey, I have to be able to identify an enemy ship, and then from memory, know it's like, hey, that enemy ship carries a missile that has a 40-mile range, so I need to stay about 40 miles away from that. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much work. And if you zoom past another airplane, it's like, hey, what kind of airplane was that? What country was it from? So you have to learn all the markings from all the different countries to learn what airplane it is, what country it's from, what weaponry it has on it. I mean, that's about 1/100th of all the things that we have to know.
Yes.
Aviation off of a carrier is a terribly unforgiving environment, right? So you have to follow process and procedures, right? Otherwise, you'll pay the ultimate price. I mean, people are going to die if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that brings us to today and talking about reducing business growth challenges. So you got out of the military and you started to become a fractional COO and helping people run these businesses, or COO in the businesses. And now we're moving and talking about, startups, high growth companies. And when we look at these things, and you look at the growth challenges, are there some common threads that you see amongst these businesses that are growing rapidly, or the challenges they're having as they grow?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some similarities. Just how you know how sometimes you think that when something's happened to you or you're going through something, like you're the only one going through this. Oh man, nobody can understand what we're going through. Well, guess what? There's lots of companies out there, and there's stages that companies go through. So I work with a system called predictable success, and that system just says basically companies go through 7 stages of growth and decline, right? And it's common. It happens to small companies, it happens to single person companies, it happens to nonprofits. And they get to this point where they run into some challenges. And there's some specific ways to move through those challenges, but I can back up and talk about how they got there. So
Yeah.
beginning, if you look at most companies start with an idea, right? And in predictable success, we call this stage early struggle. An early struggle means that you have a product or a service that you want to sell. Now you have to go out and find a profitable and sustainable market before
Mm-hmm.
whatever seed money you have runs out, right? Everybody's going to do that. So they find some way to start the business with whatever funding that they have, whatever source it is, and you go out and search for someone that's going to buy your product or service. And they have to buy it at a profit, right? And that has to be sustainable, because you can find a profitable business and you can find sustainable, but it needs to be both in order to be successful. And then you
Mm-hmm.
get to this point where you're actually profitable. Like, hey, we can make payroll. We could do this. We could actually have money to put into the business. We have money to save, money to invest, money to buy things for the business. That's when you reach that point where the business is self-sustaining. And I think everybody goes through that, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the next stage coming up is what we in predictable success calls fun, which means it's fun. You've got clients, your client list is growing. And one of the things that you're doing is you're saying yes to everything. So a client says, hey, can you deliver this to Poland? And you look at each other, you look at the client and go, yes, we can do that. And then you walk away from that meeting going, man, how are we going to do that? Right? And you go
Yes.
back, you put your head together, and you figure something out and you pull it off. Right? And a lot of companies have those things where they said yes to things and they had no idea what they were doing, or a little bit of an idea what they were doing, and then they pulled it
Mm-hmm.
off, right? And they said
Mm-hmm.
yes to everything, right? And that's all good stuff. And I think every company's been in that stage too, right? Where everything is a whole lot of fun. And I'll stop there because because fun is it's a great place to be, right? But as fun, you start to increase the number of clients and you start to increase your revenue. And I think you've
Yes.
seen this too. Sometimes you increase your revenue and then you have to increase your resources, and you increase both at the same time. So what happens to your profits?
Yeah.
Your
The
profits
profits go
start to
down.
decline. You're like, hey, we
Yeah.
got a new client, we need to hire 2 more people. Hey, we got another client, we need to hire 2 more people.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? You're growing, right? But your profits are declining.
Yeah.
And then the company
Well,
is starting to run into some issues because of the number of people that you have. Because when you're having fun, right, your doers and deciders are the same people. So you've got a really small group, and the people who are doing all the work and the people who are making the decisions are the same people. So you can make a quick decision and you can implement that decision very quickly,
mm-hmm.
right? You
Yeah.
can say, hey, let's open up an office in Miami. And when you get to the top of the elevator ride, right, where you're discussing this, you're like, yep, we're opening an office in Miami, right? You
Yeah.
can do that when the doers and deciders are the same people. As the company starts to grow, the deciders are now a leadership team and the doers are a much larger team. So you can make decisions quickly, but you can't implement or execute those decisions quickly at all because
Mm-hmm.
just through the complexity of growth. Now you have a leadership team. You have to communicate that decision to people and then you have to trust others to do it, right? So things are starting to get more complex. You're starting to
Mm-hmm.
drop the ball just by virtue of being larger and having more people in the mix. That all makes sense so far?
Yeah, and I imagine that communication is really simple as you're in that fun zone where people are doing, deciding. But do you see that as you move into that and the teams get bigger and there's more leadership and doers separate, do you see that companies struggle with a lot of the communication things that, you should just know this, but it's really needs to be communicated, or what are some things that you see as they go through that transition from we're having fun, we're doing and deciding, to we have deciders and doers separate?
You're right. There are challenges with communication. And that phase, when they move out of fun and things start to get complex and things start to slow down and they can't really say yes to everything and turn on the dime anymore, in predictable success, we call that stage whitewater. And that is typically just what you said, right? I mean, we talk about companies start making mistakes. The challenge in this phase of whitewater is that previously in fun, you were delivering consistent quality in the face of simplicity. Things were simple. You didn't have a whole lot of people, so you didn't have to have a whole bunch of processes and everything like that. And things happen pretty quickly. As you start to grow and you have 15, 20, 25 people, right? You are now trying to deliver consistent quality in the face of complexity, right? And that's difficult. And communication is part of that. How are you communicating? Another issue you have is that when small companies, some of the roles tend to be defined by the capabilities of the human being in that role, right? And so whatever the role is, the people can just do whatever. It's like, hey, you're the HR person, you're this person and that person. But then, as the company grows, guess what you have to start making? You have to start developing an org chart.
Yeah.
And the org chart, once you start filling out the positions in the org chart, you now need to transition those roles from the capabilities of that person in the role to what the company needs. So in other words, if the
Yep.
title is creative director, whatever that is, right? You now have to write down for the company, what does the creative director need to do for this company? Not what the person in that job is doing now. What do they have to do to support the goals of this company? And as it turns out, you may have some people that you may have to change their roles because they may not be capable of doing some of the things that
Mm-hmm.
are needed to be done for that specific job. So things do start to get really hard. But the org
Yep.
chart is a decision making machine, right? You start there, right? Because then the org chart shows you where the decisions are being made and it clarifies the roles of everyone in the company.
Yeah. Well, I think this is probably the beginnings of, as you go from startup phase into more mature business phase, and people talk about the fact that you probably won't end with the people that you started with, simply because they're not going to be able to change with the business. And I think this is where a lot of people that do enjoy that startup doer and decider workplace don't really fit well as these businesses scale. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So we talked about before, like I said, in predictable success, these stages of business. So that whitewater stage, and then there's a stage called predictable success after that, where the company is much scalable, which means that you've kind of worked through all of those issues, and now you're a well-oiled machine. And a lot of people in the company don't make it from that whitewater stage to that predictable success stage. So now
Yeah.
let's talk about the types of people that make up those organizations. Now, you heard of visionaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Visionaries are the people that start companies, right? And
Yep.
so, just like think about DISC and all these assessments that people do. So, again, this one's a little bit different. In predictable success, we have visionaries. Everybody knows what a visionary is. At least I think they do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you have operators. Operators are people who go out and just get stuff done, right? You know, probably a couple people you can call. It's like, hey, I need this done. Let me call so and so because I know they'll get it done. They're relentless
Mm-hmm.
finishers. They know how to get stuff done. And then there's processors. Processors are the people who put systems and processes in place, right? So you've got an organization made up of those three people because, or those three types of people. Because as the organization gets larger, you come to realize, like, man, we have to set up some systems and processes that we can't keep making it up as we go along,
Yeah.
right? Because every time, I mean, you've been in a company like this, you're doing the same thing. Let's say, like proposals. Every time you do a proposal, it's something different, right? It's like, why does it feel like it's the first time we're doing this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have a good system or process and we're making it up. So you've got
Yeah.
people who do that. And all three of those people just are wired differently, right? So
Mm-hmm.
visionaries are sort of consumed with starting things. Visionaries like to start stuff. Also, visionaries are the ones, they like to start a lot of stuff. So the visionary comes in with a million ideas, right? Every
Yeah.
day, right? And then operators just want to finish stuff. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? And processors are the people that sustain it, right? Let's sustain it, let's systematize it and make it repeatable. And those three people, or those three kinds of people, are kind of at odds all the time because their
Mm-hmm.
motivations and perceptions are different. And I'll give you an example. 8 a.m. Like if you look at the time, 8 a.m. Well, the visionary says, oh, 8 a.m. I think the bakery down the street opens at 8 a.m. Right. And the operator looks at 8 a.m. and says, man, that's 2 hours after I get to work. Right. And then 8 a.m., the processor, that's the exact time that the processor shows up every day because that's what time it says in the employee handbook. Right. And so, you've got people that have those different feel, they're just wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
Meetings. Visionary looks at meetings as, hey, here's the place for me to just go and talk about ideas and ramble on, right? The operator, it's just like, why are you wasting my time with this meeting? I got work to do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the processor's like, what is the agenda? And they're sitting there looking at the agenda, if there is one, and crossing things off as they go through it. Right. So those people are just wired differently. And some of the turbulence between those three perceptions of life and the way those three types of people work are the cause of some of the issues that companies have in whitewater.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
So this really comes to bring something to mind, and I ask. So you really need to understand what kind of person out of these three, the visionary, the operator, or processor type of person, you need in a certain role, don't you?
Absolutely. So listen to this, right? So you're talking about, let's go back and talk about early struggle, right? So early struggle, you usually have a visionary that's going to start a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if a visionary goes out and gets another visionary to help him or her start a company? They
Yeah.
usually
It's
end up
got
talking about a lot of stuff and nothing happens,
yes.
right?
Well,
So what a
and
vision, go ahead.
yeah, this is one good point though, that I think that people, when we're looking at growth and we're looking at who we hire as we're growing a company, we really need to look at that role, what that role requires, and probably not all the time, but the vast majority of the time, it's probably not going to be like you if you're the one that started the company.
Correct. So usually visionaries will go out and find an operator to go out and help them start the company. So in that stage, we talked about fun after they found their profitable, sustainable market and things are going well. It's usually a visionary and several operators just going out and getting stuff done. And then as they
Mm-hmm.
grow, or they recognize the need for systems and processes, and then they get a processor to come in and start inserting those systems and processes. So what happens? The visionary says, hey, we need systems and processes for everyone except me, right? The visionaries
Yeah.
don't typically want to follow the systems and
Yeah.
processes that they want everybody else to follow, right? And then the operator is like, what do you mean I got to this process? You're slowing me down. I got work to do. I don't have time to do process, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so a good example of this is keeping track of time, because I've run into this in companies I've been, right? It's so you come in and the processor's like, hey, we need to keep track of our time. We need you operator and your operator group to keep track of their time, because we need to know how much it costs for us to do a project, right? Because we want to
Yep.
make sure that we're doing it profitably. And then the operator's like, I can't, now you want me to take, now you want me to keep track of my time. Now you want me to fill out forms. Now you want me to do this, right? And so there's that constant struggle, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
processor thinks that the visionary and operators are mavericks. The visionary thinks that the processor is slowing them down and stifling their creativity. And again, you can see how you need all those three people, but they're all motivated by different things. And that causes some of the turbulence in Whitewater.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you see people get into this point to where they're moving out of where they're having fun, where they're deciding and doing, and moving into the where the company really becomes more difficult to operate, but actually, if you successfully get there, more sustainable. Um, what are some of the things they really need to be addressing in that point to where we used to do it like this, and now we're in this state where it's kind of like you said, whitewater, I think you called it, is where
Yeah.
we've got customers, we're growing, but it's kind of chaotic. So what are some of the steps that they should do? Because I intuitively, I feel like this is a spot to where you need to step back and kind of take the lay of the land and then make some decisions here. Do a little bit of planning or something at this point, because otherwise, do these companies just stay in this churn like this
Right.
forever?
Well, you're absolutely right. And let me talk about this, right? So the first thing they need to do is be committed to moving to predictable success through Whitewater, because a perfectly acceptable option is to move back into this period of fun. But that means that there's
Ah,
going to be a limit on the company's growth, right?
mm-hmm,
You can only grow so much, right? If you want to get to the point where you can scale, you have to go to predictable success. And I don't think I fully answered your question the last time, and I think this should answer it. Another thing they have to commit to is not everybody's going to make that journey to predictable success. And a lot of times it's the operators that end up dropping out, because those people who are operators, they just want to get stuff done. They don't want to be encumbered by processes, and they actually liked the fun part, right? So the
mm-hmm,
fun was really, really good for the operators. And there's some operators that will just resist the processes, they'll resist the processor, and the company's not going to be able to move forward with those people. I've been in a situation where I had, and this is looking back on this before I actually knew what predictable success
mm-hmm,
was. But there is something we call big dog operators, which means these operators they're really, really dominant operators, right? Because everybody kind of has a trace of visionary operator processor, and some people have like no traces of visionary or processor, and they're all operators, let's say, right? Those
mm-hmm,
people really, really resist. They're like, hey, this company's not what it used to be. It used to be fun. It's going to be a different company, and I don't want to be a part of that. And they'll actually start to sabotage some of the efforts to move forward. So those people have to go. Now, some of those people are co-founders of the company and close friends, people that the visionary CEO, they may be godparents to each other's children. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Because they went through a lot together, but everyone is not going to make it to that. And so they have to be really committed to scaling and committed to doing that. If not, it's perfectly okay for them to move back to fund, but they just know they're not going to grow. There's going to be a cap on their growth if they do that.
That's a great point, because I think a lot of people get stuck in, oh, we got to scale, we got to scale, we got to scale. But if you're not really committed on going all the way to having the right people in the right spots, then staying at a certain size where you can do what you do, how you're doing it today and having fun is an acceptable option.
Well, you're right. And one company that I was a part of, I kind of looked around and said, okay, and I'll make these numbers up. We're an $8 million company with, with $1 million in profit, right? Well, let's first be an $8 million company with $2 million in profit, right? And then we can
Hmm.
then we can talk about whether or not we want to scale, right? So become
Yeah.
as efficient as you can
Well,
before making that decision to move to predictable success. And my sense was that this company, looking back, they would have probably, had they understood this whole concept, had I understood it, right, and been a part of it, it would have been best to move that company back into fun.
yeah. Well, yeah, and you're right, because you can operate where you have deciders and doers doing the work together, making the quick decisions and doing that, and then work on your increasing your profitability rather than growing the business, because you don't necessarily need to grow top line revenue to grow profits.
Absolutely. And not everybody, let's say single person businesses. So right now I'm a single person business, right? It's just me.
Hmm.
I can only do so much. I have no desire to build a large team, to build a huge company to go out and do what I'm doing. So for me, as a single person business, fun is the place that I want to be.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good point, because sometimes, like I said, I think it just, we get a lot of people get fixated on that scaling and crash going through it because they don't want to get the right people in the right spots. And there's a lot of, I don't know. Do you think that that happens a lot, where people go, "Oh, well, we got to get this to scale," and they just don't get there because they don't commit, or they can't really get the right people in the right roles?
Well, there's a I think those are some of the systems, but there's a lot more to it too, right? Everybody's got to be aligned. Like the visionary has to share his or her vision and make sure that everyone else is aligned with that vision. So that's one of those
Right.
things we call alignment, right? Everybody, I mean, have you ever been anywhere where the mission statement wasn't clear or the vision wasn't clear? I mean, those things have to be clear and then they have to be committed to it. And everybody in the organization has to understand that goal and be committed to working towards it. The other part of
Yeah.
it is something that in predictable success calls the enterprise commitment. And this is for the leadership team. When you are a part of the leadership team, you are there to move the business forward, not necessarily your silo of the business, right? So the
Hmm.
decisions that you make as part of the leadership team should be those that are best for the business and not necessarily best for your department. Does that make sense? And if people
No.
understand
Yeah.
that, right, that's part of it. And then once they understand that, then they actually start working laterally, which means that if you're in operations, you're looking at the other department going, okay, if I make this decision, how is that going to impact finance? How is that going to impact operations? They're actually thinking about some of the other parts of the business. And then the teams, not necessarily the leadership team, people are actually working cross functionally. They're actually moving outside of their silo and communicating with people who aren't necessarily in their in their group. And that's really the best place you could be. That's part of alignment. So they have to sort of get that piece. So again, another
Yeah.
organization I was a part of, you just had a fight between different departments, right? They didn't work together. They're just constantly fighting for resources. They lacked that
Hmm.
enterprise commitment, and they weren't going to make it to predictable success until they, as the leadership team, understood that they were all there to move the whole business forward.
Yeah. And I can imagine that as you get a little bit bigger too, it's easier to silo and silo and silo, and to create more of these silos where people are, just
It
allocating for
is
what's best for them.
It is, and one of the things that I did as a fractional COO is just created a cross-functional project. Pick something that was cross-functional that would benefit the entire company. And my
Yeah.
favorite was onboarding. Let's pick people from every department and start working on the onboarding process, because that benefits everyone. It gets you people
Mm-hmm.
used to working together. There are no, I mean, in onboarding, everybody's kind of equal, right? You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
cross-functional projects are really the way to do that. And then once you get people starting to work cross-functionally, and then you start, when you have the room in your business to allow people to do other things, in a
Mm-hmm.
creative agency, you've got somebody that comes in sales and said, hey, I'd really like to learn how to be a part of the film crew. It's like, okay, yeah, well, okay, we can work some time into it. Your primary job can't suffer, but we will allow you some time to go and work with a film crew and see that that's something that you might want to do. It benefits
Mm-hmm.
everybody. Teaches them a new skill. It teaches them a new appreciation and understanding for people in other departments and how they work. Right. So those are all great things to do.
Yeah, and I can imagine that um, letting people work outside of their normal area once in a while too, or develop those other skills helps them within their area too, because they start to see more holistically how what they do affects the rest of the business.
Especially when especially when they're tangible things. And I'll give you an example of when I was a manager of a large group of people at Boeing, and my people actually touched the airplane. Right, we actually had people that got on the airplane.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people at Boeing that never get to touch an airplane. Right, they're sitting up there in
Mm-hmm.
front of spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, and all sorts of other stuff. So I opened up a position in my department called, it doesn't matter what it was called, but that allowed anybody in the entire organization to come and train and do this role for aircraft delivery, where they would actually get to walk on the airplane with the client and check a bunch of things off before we delivered the airplane, right? And that's oversimplifying it. But I says, here's the commitment. You got to do this. And the more people we have qualified to do it, it's going to be better for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
To get people who have been sitting in front of contracts, spreadsheets, and PowerPoint presentations all day, to get them actually on an aircraft, right? They didn't get to fly, but they at least got on it. When the aircraft had power on it, you got to see
Yep.
all the things light up,
Make
right?
sure it works.
They
Yeah.
were You wouldn't believe how it energized those people. I mean, how they would come back and go, man, I was on the airplane today. It was great. I mean, and just a little
Very cool.
program like that, I had almost more people than we could handle coming in and volunteering to do that. Right. And it,
Huh.
it helped the entire organization by having as many people as we could qualified to do that particular job.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff there. Because that yeah, cross training is so important in that. So as you're going through this and we're in this situation where we're past the fun stage, we're in this whitewater, things are going. What are some of the typical things you're going to see? You talked about quality of delivery of product. You're going to see some quality problems. What are some of the other typical things that you see as a company's really past the fun stage and in that whitewater stage where they're growing, but it's not pretty?
Crisis management and firefighting, right? You know how it is,
Okay.
right? So you'll see that. I mean, if that's the norm, I mean, do you want to come in and just fight fires every day and manage crises every day? That's part of it. Stalled growth. Again, just screw ups, just people dropping the ball. Like, hey, you either, if you've got a product, you've either delivered them to the wrong place, you've delivered the wrong quantity, you've delivered the wrong product, or if a service, you've just got the client coming back and your clients aren't as happy as they used to be. They're like, hey, you guys aren't doing as well as you used to. So
Mm-hmm.
infighting between different groups. I mean, there's just, there's a lot of those things. Just churn in general. You may have some employee churn. You may just have people leaving, and not
Yeah.
understanding why. A few
Yeah.
of those things are symptoms as well.
Yeah. Just write a couple notes here as I'm thinking through this because it is, a lot of companies get to that stage. Um, and maybe you even got some numbers. So how many companies get that stage and actually go past it?
I actually don't have numbers for that, so I'm sorry. I don't have
Okay.
numbers
No,
that.
I was just curious because
But
it's interesting to see how many actually get past the point or how many just live in that kind of crisis mode for many, many years. Because I mean, you can be profitable in there. It's just not as good as you want to
yeah,
be.
well, one of the things I really liked about this predictable success, right? Because there's a lot of systems out there, and I found this one. I read all the books, and decided to become a predictable success practitioner, right? Because I found it to be very intuitive. And if more companies understood this, it's almost like adolescence, right? Puberty. You're gonna go through it, right? You're gonna go through it, and you just got to get through it, right?
Yeah.
And it just happens. And so one of the things of predictable success is, hey, you're going to go through this. Here are some ways we can help you get through it quickly. But I think just knowing it, just knowing about those stages, recognizing the phase that you're in and going, wow, man, this is just kind of a normal part of growth. Well, yeah, it is. And then understanding those kinds of people and then how bringing in the right kinds of people at the right time matters. Because if you're in fun, right, and you bring in processors too early, there's if you're out there just running around with a couple people, you don't need that much process, right? So
Hmm.
again, or if you bring in another visionary and then you start to get dominant with visionaries and you have all these ideas and you don't have enough people to go out and execute those ideas. So that's why I think it's important. Now, one person that I did, or one type of person that I didn't mention earlier is a person called a synergist. Synergist is the person that's going to get into predictable success, because I'm a synergist. A synergist is a person that understands all three of the others. And the synergist is a learned style, which means at some point you were a visionary operator or a processor and you evolved into being a synergist. And the synergist is kind of the one that works behind the scenes to get everyone else to understand the motivations of the other. So what I did as a fractional COO is I sit back and, I'm looking at the operator going, hey, the operator needs to do this and the company needs to know that, or the processor needs you to log your time, because we
Hmm.
really need to know how much it costs us to do stuff. You know what I mean? And then you also go to the visionary and go, listen, you have 1,000 ideas today, and the operator can only do two of those. And
Yep.
so let's figure out which two are the most important. And let's maybe kind of pull back on some of the ideas and changes in direction, because you're burning the operators out. Okay?
Hmm.
And so it's with that sort of style of person that you get into predictable success.
Yes, because it does. I tell you, it does really take someone that knows about all the types of people to really see what's the right type of person for a position, and where are we gonna we're here now, we need to go there, and it's going to take someone like that or that help to get that person there.
Yeah, and let me I'll talk about that predictable success pathway a little bit more. There's actually predictable success is sort of at the pinnacle of this thing, and there's actually you can actually start to decline, and the first stage of this decline is called it's called treadmill. And what happens with treadmills, you start to actually become over processed, and you may have seen some companies like this where people live to execute the process.
Yeah.
It is now more important to actually do the checklist than it is to complete what the checklist was there for to begin with, right? Think
Hmm.
government agencies and things like that, right? Where it's like, no, this is the process, and they're so rigid on the process that they start to lose that innovation and creativity, right? So the key in that, in getting yourself back to predictable success, is to bring more visionaries is to hire, right? Through your hiring practices, you can bring more visionaries in. You can bring fewer processors in, right? Bring in more visionaries, and that should kickstart your innovation and creativity, right? So that's like, like I said, like you can tell I'm a big proponent of this, because one, it's very intuitive. You don't have to go to a class or get a certification to understand visionary, operator, processor, and synergist, right? Nor
Hmm.
do you have to do, hey, this is fun, this is whitewater, this is predictable success. I find it to be very intuitive. And so I find it to be important, because if you're sitting at this predictable success, right? Do you want to bring in more processors? Do you want to bring in more visionaries? Or if you're in fun, do you want to bring in another visionary? Again, just knowing that will help you, and having the right person and the right makeup of the leadership team is important to keep that company in that place where it's scalable.
Yeah, because it's always going to change too. I would think as you keep scaling your company, you're going to need to really be measuring the, you know, are we flexible enough to really be innovative and do the things we want, and are we process driven enough to make high quality, people can count on us doing it the right way every time, and are we getting it, do we have enough capacity to get the things done like we want to get them done.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And then you talked about decisions too. So remember, when you're kind of in fun, right? You can make decisions quickly and implement them quickly, right? When you're in
Mm-hmm.
whitewater, you make decisions quickly, but it takes forever to implement them, right? When you're in this stage called predictable success, you actually make decisions slowly, but implement them quickly, right? Because everybody's aligned and everybody's committed to the enterprise. And the slow part is because you've built this team and you've built this communication network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where people are communicating laterally, they're communicating with each other. So the decision making is slower, but the implementation is a lot faster.
Yeah. That's a great point, because I think as people see businesses getting bigger, they think the overall process is slower. But I think if you do it right, at least to a certain point, obviously, if it gets huge, you can actually speed your decision, the overall to the end result, getting to the end result, because we take a little more time at the beginning to really make sure we going to do it, make sure everybody's aligned. We've got the input, but then it's like whoosh, it goes through a lot faster.
You're absolutely right. 100%.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's so interesting to me as you dissect, and we're getting close to time here. It's so interesting to me here as you start to dissect the challenges of a company that's really growing, and understand and looking at them differently, and really understand the people that you need, the roles that you need to fill, and how that's constantly changing, and how the leaders really need to be aware of that.
Yeah, again, I think that once I became aware of this, once I started studying it, I was able to go back and reflect upon every organization I've been a part of and figure out, oh, that's why we were having that problem. I get it. That's why this didn't happen. That's why this did happen. I really think it's advantageous to know this. Listen, there's a lot of other systems out there. You know that.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
EOS, there's all
yeah,
sorts of systems. I mean,
yeah,
pick one.
yeah,
This is just the one that
yeah,
works for me, right? And this
yeah.
is the one that I gravitated to because I felt it was intuitive. And a lot of it, I felt like I could have wrote myself, because as a fractional COO and an independent, I was going out, and some of the solutions to getting out of whitewater were solutions that I was implementing. I
Yes.
walked in somewhere and went, oh, we don't have an org chart. Let's get that straightened out. Let's get the roles, let's get people's roles and responsibilities clarified. Let's figure out where decisions are being made. Now let's do this. Well, guess what? That's one of the things in predictable success that, one of the first things that we do when moving a company from whitewater into predictable success. And that whole part, I felt like I could have wrote it myself when I got there. But again,
Yeah.
with business systems, right, there's a lot of them out there. I recommend that people just go and take a look, right? Because I've
Well,
seen a
yeah.
bunch of copy on stages that companies go through, and I think they're all right. So just
Yeah,
pick the one that
exactly.
works for you and go with it, right?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's like, these are like, genes. There's a lot of different kinds of genes. You just got to put a pair on that works for you. And really, the thing that's cool about what you talked about today, you talked about predictable success, and we've mentioned EOS, and there are other systems, but you really need to look at what's happening in your organization, and look at some of these systems, because they will give you that basic foundation and give you some tools that can help you continue to refine and improve your business.
Yeah, let me just go back to, you talked before about aircraft, right? The airplanes. So in my flying career, right, We have a plan. You got to start with a plan, right? So we plan the flight,
Mm-hmm.
we execute the flight, and then we debrief everyone. So we figure out what went good and what went bad, and the goal is continuous improvement, right? And the same thing with the business, right? Just make a plan, any plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? Work towards executing that plan, right? And then step back and evaluate how the plan is going and adjust accordingly. And then
Yeah.
be ready for things not to go according to that plan as well.
Yes. 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 Yeah, exactly. Well, this is awesome, Ron, because you've I'm just so appreciative of you coming by and talking about this, because I think business owners go a lot of times, or leaders, business owners in these higher growth companies, and go, man, this is really unique. But it's not. These things happen all over. If they can step back, take a look at it, maybe get some tools and some help, they can really make a difference and
Yeah,
work through these issues.
yeah, you are not alone.
Yeah, you are
Right?
not
There
alone.
are companies out there doing, experiencing the same kinds of problems you are, and there is a way to navigate your way through those problems. And
Yes,
a
yes.
system will help you. I know Predictable Success will help you. You have any questions about it? Happy to go through it with you. And I know there's some other systems out there that'll help you as
Yes,
well.
there are. Yes, there are. Well, Ron, thanks so much for being here today. Again, we have Ron Higgs from Wolf Management Solutions talking about the reducing business growth challenges. And we're talking about predictable success and some of the key things that you need to consider as you go through different stages of scaling and growing your companies. Thanks so much for being here today, Ron. So where's a good place for people to get a hold of you?
Oh, LinkedIn. You know how much I love LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn. Reach out,
All
send
right.
me a connection request. That is the best place to find me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. Thanks, Ron, for stopping by and sharing your knowledge. Appreciate you. And we will be back again later this week.
Thanks for having me, Dan.